is 5 o'clock p.m. on Monday, January 25th, 2021. I would like to call to order the Education Operations Committee meeting of the Wausau Board of Education. Agenda item 2 is to approve the minutes from December 18th, 2020. I am seeking a motion to approve the minutes of December 18th, 2020.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Those minutes are approved. Agenda item 3 is public and student comment. I think we do have a couple of individuals, so I'll go over that information while I'm waiting for those from Clerk Peck. I do want to point out there was one public comment received, thank you, by email, and that will be posted with the information later this week for public review. It also has been circulated for board review. As far as in-person comment, there are 4 individuals. So I'm going to review the public comment policy and pertinent part policy 167.3. Anyone having a legitimate interest in the actions of the board may comment during the public portion of the meeting. Those statements are limited to 3 minutes in duration. Clerk Peck will hold up the timer at 30 seconds and time. Let's see. Speakers shall direct all comments to the board and not to staff or other participants. Public comments identifying specific personnel or students by name or through the use of sufficiently detailed descriptions so as to identify the individual staff or student referenced are not appropriate subjects for presentation to the school board and shall be referred to the superintendent's office. Comments will be rejected if the content is reasonably interpreted to constitute discriminatory or harassing statements on the basis of any protected classification. Speakers bear the personal risk if anything they say during the public comment period is defamatory, slanderous, or otherwise harmful to another individual. Okay, so we have 4 individuals, and I'll just let you know right now who those 4 are so your orders you can be prepared. It'll be John Mawsons, followed by Karen Vandenberg, followed by John Kreischer, followed by Paul Harold. And you'll just come up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes. All right, Mr. Mawsons. Yes, right there, please.
Good evening. John Mawsons, 803 Steuben Street. Good evening. As you know, I represent the 690 teachers with the WEA, so as such, I have an obligation to advocate for them. As you can guess, I'm here regarding the relaunch topic. My guess is that most minds have been made up in regard to this topic, so I'm here more as a way of maybe making some reminders, hoping that we can work together on this situation moving forward. I would simply implore you to put the safety of the students and staff as your guiding light as we move forward with this next step. I'm not here to kick and scream. We didn't send letters, as you know. That'll save some open records work on your folks' part. We know that kids will be back. Eventually, we welcome them back with open arms. We always have. We look forward to that day. The WEA simply requests the safety of all school personnel be put above the politics, the potential votes, and other outside forces, as I think you know. We request continued use of science to guide us in our endeavor. And I think we're all in that boat. We're very educated people here. For example, in this slide presentation that we will see at the end tonight, I did see that Elmbrook is mentioned. Elmbrook's a very good school district, the Brookfield Schools. They use a rolling, I talked to a gentleman from Elmbrook. One of the things that Elmbrook does is they use a rolling 3-day average to determine if a school should close due to COVID. I'm wondering if we could consider such parameters moving forward if we're going to move to more kids being in person. It deals with safety, safety, safety. At the very least, we believe very strongly that all teachers, all school personnel should be vaccinated with both vaccinations before we move forward with this endeavor. With that, I'll end with what I said just a minute ago: safety, 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 and thank you very much for your hard work. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Wassens. Next is Karen Vandenberg. Mrs. Vandenberg, please state your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Karen Vandenberg, 508 South 52nd Avenue, Wausau, Wisconsin. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I stand before you as a healthcare provider who has cared for patients with COVID and post-COVID daily for 8 months. I care deeply for my patients. I'm also an incredibly concerned parent and community mentor who has watched teens and families drowning with the virtual education that's been forced upon them with no options. I'm here to stand in the gap for them. Since this summer, I have watched half of this board make decisions for Project Relaunch based on emotions and what-if worst-case scenarios with absolutely no metrics. What if a student dies? What if a teacher dies? What if we can't maintain 6 feet? What about vaccines? What about the new strains of COVID? All of us have what-ifs. Please consider these. What if the substance abuse that we know has increased among our teens leads to a lifetime of addiction? What if the outrageous failure and truancy leads to dropouts, poverty, and homelessness? What if the unchecked abuse of a student leads to irreparable trauma? What if the depression and self-harm on the rise in our students leads to suicide and we have to bury one of our own? Excellent and wise leadership must have the courage to make tough decisions based on facts. Here are the facts. We have widespread failure in this district among our secondary students. We have reduced the content taught by nearly 50% in most secondary classes with unrecoverable academic loss. We have overwhelming truancy and changed academic trajectories, especially among our most vulnerable students and families with massive equity issues. Our students are having major increases in mental health issues, tremendous struggles maintaining academic motivation, and student suicides are surging nationally. The CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics have told us to open schools because it's what's best for kids. We have had 5,691 COVID deaths in our state. Devastating, absolutely. But those deaths represent 1.06% of all COVID infections, and 92% of those deaths were individuals over 60 and overwhelmingly over 70 and 80 who are not in our schools. All of the national and local data continues to confirm that in-person learning in our schools are not the primary source of viral spread. We saw COVID case numbers in our community rise and fall again since peaking in November, independent of in-person learning. The CDC website currently outlines guidelines for schools to space students 6 feet when possible. I'm going to graciously ask for 1 more minute. Finally, can I ask for 1 more minute? Ms. Zunker?
The policy is 3 minutes. We are in receipt of your comment. Thank you. Okay. And I ask that we maintain order through public comment and through the entire meeting, please. Thank you. Mr. Kreischer, you're here. Please state your name, address for the record, and remember it is 3 minutes. Thank you.
John Kreischer, 151008 Juniper Lane. Last week's school board meeting will probably go down as one of the most disturbing displays of politics we have seen to date from the school board. Within mere seconds of announcing Dr. Keith Hiltz's plan to discuss Project Relaunch, a board member moved to table the discussion, almost giddy with excitement at the thought of derailing what was only to be mere discussion.
Sorry.
I'll continue.
No, I need to say something. I'm sorry.
Another board member, you're interrupting
President
my
Zunker,
time. I'm here to give my public comment. How are you allowed to?
Sir, President
Wow.
Zunker,
Yes.
we are all aware that these are school board candidates. So I just want to know, Mr. Kreischer, are you campaigning right now?
No, I'm here as a father of 4 in the district and concerned about what I don't see as rational thought and common sense being applied to many situations.
Thank
You know,
you.
you can't even give a discussion for you spend so much time on the referendum, but
Okay,
you can't give
let's-
time. So
Mr.
can I finish my
Kreischer,
comments?
we'll start your 3 minutes again.
Okay, thank you.
It is important, you know, I did review some of the policy. I don't know, you know, calling out the individual board members.
I'm stating what board members said in the last meeting. I'm simply,
Let me explain why I asked, okay?
can I please finish?
So,
Can I explain why I asked?
I think we'll let the individual provide his 3-minute public comment.
Go ahead, Mr. Kreischer.
Another board member seconded the motion, stating, if we talk about it, meaning Project Relaunch, at this meeting, we're giving it more time and energy than we should. I and most of this community were at a loss for words. The mission of this district and board is to advance student learning, achievement, and success. Right now, the opposite is being done, and it will have ramifications for these students in this district for years to come. However, I did not come here to be pessimistic because I am an optimist. It's been hard to remain optimistic given the unfolding events in this district since last summer. This district and board demonstrated that they have the power and leadership to arrange a special meeting to complete the necessary work for 2 school referendum questions to be placed on the ballot in April. Given that demonstration, I would ask that this district and board put in the same amount of work and show the same sense of urgency for what matters most, that being the students' education and their overall health. This board will review compelling data that should bring you to a logical conclusion of the action that must be taken. This board needs to call for a special meeting to determine a quicker path to returning secondary level students to in-person learning before February 8th. The Waukesha School District Board reviewed the same data that this very board reviewed in early December: failing grades, truancy, suffering, mental health, etc. And the Waukesha Board voted on January 13th unanimously to send their secondary students back to school 5 days per week, while offering a virtual option. Waukesha is a school district of 12,000 students, nearly double the size of our school, and they are sending their students back tomorrow, January 26, not 5 weeks, not 3, 2 weeks from making their decision. Please put the children first tonight.
Sure. The final individual, Mr. Harold, if you could state your name and address for the record, please, and then you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Paul Harold, 153070 Morning Glory Lane. When I commented at the December 21st meeting, I asked the board to remain focused on 2 simple priorities. One being securing funding for needed support and infrastructure, and 2, charting a path to the most effective mode of learning for our students, that being in-person learning. Tonight's Project Relaunch update attempts to move us forward. I have 2 simple requests pertaining to this agenda item tonight. One is, please afford Dr. Hiltz the opportunity to present. And second, consider moving this effort forward with the same expediency as the referendum questions. In prior discussions of Project Relaunch, the presentations have barely begun before the group seemingly goes rogue. In one meeting, I believe there were 2 motions presented before we even got off the 2nd or 3rd slide. As there are a good number of constituents and stakeholders listening and watching tonight, please afford Dr. Hiltz the opportunity to present. This group moved rather quickly to gain consensus on the 2 referendum questions. A special meeting was called to expedite the process. At the conclusion of tonight's Project Relaunch discussion, I remain hopeful that a board member will move to call a special meeting to gain consensus on moving forward in a more timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we aren't getting to Project Relaunch until later on the agenda, but I am going to ask that throughout this meeting, we maintain civility and discourse. There shouldn't be any clapping or things of that nature. And I'm just going to ask for that. You know, in the fall, I had used my gavel many times. An individual in this room created a video of me and circulated it on YouTube. And it was to try to maintain order. And there's significantly less people here, but if we can still recognize that the group up here, this board, is doing important work, I would appreciate that. All right, moving on to... I think that when we get to that agenda item, it'll be appropriate then.
Great, thank you. I will do that.
Okay, so moving on to agenda item 4, referendum update. Dr. Hiltz.
Actually, tonight we don't have much prepared, but I did ask Mrs. White to come and give the board an update on the communication process.
All right, good evening, board members. This will be a very brief update. I just want to let you know where we are in our information campaign efforts. So our website, the one that I shared with you last week, is now live. It is posted on our website and also on our social media. And I just encourage everyone to take a look at it. Anyone who may have questions, it's really a hub of easy to understand information, which you can even break it down to your school and see the impacts there. Now that the website is live, we are also beginning our social media efforts as well. So you'll notice a lot more postings in the weeks ahead. We are also in the process of getting all of our school-specific videos. And as I mentioned last week, it's really the principals that we've gone to and asked them to talk about the need and some of the things that they're excited about. So those will also be posted on our Facebook page and then on the website as well in the coming weeks. Mailers, our first mailers headed to print, and the goal is to have that in mailboxes by the end of this week. And I did want to point out that we are condensing the timeline, recognizing early voting begins in March. So really an opportunity to make sure voters have all the information they need, whether they vote absentee or in person. So we've condensed that timeline. We have been in creative meetings to begin creating the TV spot. And again, much like the school-specific videos, our principals will be the face of that. So they are going to begin gathering their elements at the end of this week. So we're very much on course to meet that February 3rd timeline to get that launched as well. And then I failed to bring this up last week, but I did want to mention we will have design boards in each of our schools. So whether it's staff, students, or families, they'll be able to see, you know, what's in store for their schools should these referendum questions pass. So that's where we're at, and I'll certainly answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions for Diane? All right, thanks, Diana.
Thanks.
Okay, next to agenda item 5, legal expense summary for second quarter. And Mr. Tuss.
Thank you. There's a document in board book that you can review. This is not for action. After a first quarter where we had legal expenses that were almost non-existent, the second quarter is on track for a quarter, but for the year ended, well below budget right now. I believe that number that you can't see up there is 18,708. So no action needed, just giving you an update on legal expenses.
All right, any questions for Bob? Okay, I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is still you, Bob.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to do my best projecting up here and keeping up with this and making some comments. You've got documents that are much more clear in board book. When I realized that the resolution wasn't going to be perfect, I even annotated some and made some notes so at least the audience here could see some of the values that I'm going to be talking about. A lot of data, far too much to go over all of it. And literally, this only represents probably 10% of our budget fiscal projection model to begin with. You might recall in November, you were presented with some assumptions that we used and built into the model. Literally hundreds of assumptions are made. I'm not going to share them all with you, but some of the key assumptions will be shared with you again, even though you saw most of them in November. One large assumption that's also being made that's worth mentioning, no referendum success is included in any of these numbers. This is assumed that there wasn't going to be a referendum or 2 failed questions. That's important to understand. This first slide talks about our teacher compensation model, but it also drives all the other compensation for all employee groups. I think it's valuable for people to understand we're in the middle of a transition where we're moving from the 4-tier model to the single lane model, and the 3% represents the year that we're in the middle of right now. The different components of teacher salary. There are some people that are still on the old model. There are some people that are on the new model. The first year of the projection, in other words, next year, that percentage, because much of the transition will be complete, that percentage drops from 3% down to 2.5%. That's 2.5% in the teacher model without raising the numbers themselves. The matrix itself would not change, just people advancing through the model, a few more people transitioning to the new model, 2.5%. What I did is took the 2.5% for progressing on the model and replicated that for the other employee groups. So you'll see here, all employee groups are represented with a 2.5 and a 2.5. I also pointed out that this is governed by the next biennial budget that we don't know about yet. That makes projecting some of these numbers on the revenue side at least very difficult. But look what happens after the next 2 years. It goes up to 3%, 3%, 3%. In spite of the previous page, those pure movement costs go down. So that would allow 2.5 years from now putting actual dollars on the matrix itself. And that was part of the plan from the beginning. Below that, let's see if I can project up here. Below that, this represents 20 teachers retiring at a wage of $70,541. And you'll notice below that 40 teachers leaving through normal attrition at a wage of $48,395. Those are averages. And if they prevail, the projection's going to be accurate. And we're replacing all 60 of those teachers with a $48,600 salary. Some of them are brand new teachers at $43,000. Some of them are veteran teachers at $50,000 or $60,000, but the average is replacing teachers at $48,600. It's important to understand this captures some budget relief. Teachers retiring at a higher wage, being replaced at a lower wage, is budget relief. It's not in the amount of all of our teacher increases. That would be $800,000 or $900,000. This is probably $430,000. But that's an important factor. That offers budget relief, and it's built into the model. Here's some numbers on top that aren't very interesting. The FICA Medicare percentage is going to assume to be the same. The WRS contribution is assumed the same. Some of our life and disability insurance values will go up a little bit. This one's probably pretty important. Our health insurance, which is self-funded, we're projecting for the next year a 0% increase. We're also projecting a 0% increase for dental, but because the dollar amounts aren't as much, that's not quite as compelling to talk about. That zero saves the district, saves employees on their portion a lot of money when a district-wide spend is $20 million. Keeping it at zero. What allowed us to do that? Since we're self-funded, we already did see this. Our claims are down. A lot of it has to do with elective surgeries not happening. There are other things that are happening with medical claims that cause those medical claims to go down. And as a result, our fund balance did go up this year. In fact, it went up over $3 million, but over half of that was medical claims alone. And you're going to see that revealed in a couple other reports later on. So the assumption is 0% increase on health insurance. We're not going to change premiums. And again, these are the assumptions to create the baseline, right? You're going to see some things later that will obviously suggest we're going to have to change this baseline. Some non-salary assumptions. The graph on top just shows that the things that we have the most control over, we're going to keep flat. 300s and up are non-personnel, purchase services, non-capital, capital, debt service. The things that we have the most control over, we're going to keep zero. This next part, utilities, are in the 300s, but we call them out separately because they're big numbers and we do have some control over it. The fact that these are zeros, this is quite the story. Over the last 10 years, if you add up all of our utilities, we saved a third of our budget. We saved $1.1 million over 10 years in utilities alone. How did we do it? Dumb luck, first of all, right? Natural gas is very low right now. You may have noticed that. But beyond natural gas being low, we're very proactively pursuing energy efficiency improvements in our buildings, and we save more on utilities by doing that, and we're aggressively pursuing pricing on natural gas, at least for some of our buildings, some of the larger buildings. We bid out natural gas itself, we bid out the transport of the natural gas on 6 of our buildings, and we have a little bit more control over our budget that way. That's zero. I'm hoping we can even come in our budget reconciliation plan and make that a negative number eventually. Transportation up 2, followed by a bunch of 2.5s. That was part of the rework of the work in there, what's called a calamity rate, and a calamity rate pays for a student a certain amount for snow days and pandemic days and days that they have to keep their doors open and they have to continue all the flat costs and some of the other operational costs, but they don't run the buses. In exchange, we got lower rates. Fuel, we purchase fuel on our own. It's stored at first student. 2,333 is pretty stable, all things considered. Some of our other insurances that we pay for going up at 2s and 3%, pretty typical. This is a very busy page, and it's busy because I included the DPI request and what we're including in the budget assumption baseline. If we start at the top, our property value in the Wausau School District, believe it or not, this year went up 9.05%. It's a big property value increase. We're usually used to assuming things like 2s and 3s. Statewide, it was pretty high this year. We think it's going to stabilize, only the baseline, but the baseline is 2%, 2%, 2%. The only place that factors into our projection from next year is the mill rate itself. Because remember, the mill rate takes how much you levy as a tax and splits it amongst all taxpayers. So that's where that one matters. Exempt computer aid flat. The DPI requested in November, this was being discussed a lot more. The DPI was requesting $150 increase per pupil in revenue limit funding. In talking to business managers from throughout the state and a little bit with lawmakers, I think it's a safer bet, at least for the baseline, to assume 0. This alone is a very interesting conversation that we could have for an hour. If the revenue limit does go up 150, or the revenue limit stays at 0, it does not affect next year's budget as much as you might think. If we go back to last summer we didn't know we were going to get the decrease in enrollment that we did. We didn't know that was going to happen next summer. We had some projections that had our enrollment going down. When it did go down, we found ourselves not needing to reduce a lot of staff. We didn't say our September 3rd Friday count went down by 300, so we had to cut 25 staff. The revenue limit formula offers protections against that, because the revenue formula understands that you don't do your student count until September 3rd when your staffing plan is already in place. So although you get protection for the current year, kind of dings you the next year. And a big increase by the state or a big increase in more students coming back does not help you in that second year as much as you might think, because you were offered protection in the current year. Very difficult dynamic to really get your hands around unless you have the sheet in front of you and you start playing with numbers. So that difference between 150 and 0 does not make as much of a difference on our bottom line for next year as you might think. There was also talk in November about some per pupil categorical aid coming our way. That would have a greater impact because it's dollar for dollar. Each student gets a certain amount. The DPI at the time was talking about targeting certain populations of students for that $600,000. They haven't talked about it much anymore. We'll have to learn what's in the final budget to see if we can go back and include that 600. But for the purposes of our baseline, it's not in there. Investment income staying relatively flat. Energy efficiency, this one's statutory, I have to tell you about that. You passed something in 2016 called an energy efficiency exemption, and it allows you to slightly increase the levy for energy efficiency projects. That's debt service on those energy efficiency projects. Every time we save some money in utilities, we have to use that to offset the taxes. We can't use our energy savings on utilities for something else. Fund 80 levy, that's expected to stay flat. That's exactly what it is this year. This is a nice little surprise. We are expecting the aidable costs on special ed expenses to go up from 28 to 30%, and that does make a difference. And if you think that's just going to help special ed, of course it does help special ed, but it reduces the transfer that has to come from Fund 10 into Fund 27 to cover the shortage in Fund 27 special ed. This graph might overstate things a little bit because the axis does start at 7,600. It looks a little bit more volatile than if I started it at 0. But this is our revenue limit enrollment over time, including last year. If we use any kind of mathematical model to project the next year, it's going to show a very steep decline. If we go back 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. If you start to bring in the human element, people say students are going to start coming back. Also, since it's a baseline, and it's tough to talk about relative to a baseline when the baseline has an increase or a decrease, we chose to make the baseline flat. So our revenue limit enrollment for next year is projected to be the same as it was this year. The decline will stop. It won't go back up. It's assumed to be flat. On the other hand, our open enrollment trend, our current budget right now is underfunding the costs that come from open enrollment out. Our open enrollment in money that we receive from other districts and our open enrollment out money that we have to pay other districts is off by about $100,000. We're building that into the assumption, widening that gap. And again, this is just the baseline, just so we have some assumptions and a model to look at. Now comes the model itself. And these numbers are too small to look at up on the screen, but we can still gain some things from this screen. It starts out with, on top it says history. So this is the last 5 years and the current year. And the takeaway on this one, this is a red number that's about $860,000. Current year, on the books right now, we have an unbalanced budget. We have a deficit budget of $860,000. And this bar graph is probably the best place to look to understand why we were able to do that. Our fund balance went up by $3.6 million in the year that we're in the middle of. Half of that was on the health plan. That has to stay protected for our self-insured health plan. But the other $1.8 million gave you as the board comfort to pass a deficit budget. When you think about passing a deficit budget, you first think, do we have enough money in fund balance? And that suggests yes. Are there enough one-time costs that aren't going to hamstring us year after year after year? There were some one-time costs in this budget. And you have to consider the reductions that would be necessary to get that to be an even budget and the relative pain with which they come. And every year you're asked to make those decisions. That's what allowed you to pass a deficit budget. So we're already starting out $860,000 negative. The very next screen, this one was so important I had to blow up some of the numbers. This is again a repeat of the current year and then all the future years. And the projections for next year, the year after that, the year after that, they get a little bit less accurate as time goes. So we spend quite a bit of time talking about only next year. That's the most urgent anyway. This number right here is this number. That's $1.68 million that we need to reduce to get to have a balanced budget. In addition, coming into my office, and we've been looking at them every single week, coming into my office over the last couple of months were another $1.18 million in additional requests. If you put the original target together with all of the new budget requests that come in, we've got quite a task ahead of us, cutting $2.86 million to have a balanced budget. The strategies included to balance that budget, first of all, we're going to take a close, hard look at some of our assumptions. I already mentioned one of them, utilities. Could we reduce utilities? It's a possibility. Might some of our other assumptions be off? Could we make other budget reductions? Could we make staffing reallocations? In the additional requests, there are staffing requests. But when enrollment goes down, like our enrollment has gone down, probably going to have a hard time defending staffing additions, so they're going to be staffing allocations. So it could dilute that middle number. Could we identify some one-time costs in next year's budget that would give us another level of comfort, taking some from fund balance? We're considering a $4 million referendum in April. Part of the referendum for operational purposes was to flatten out the impact of irregular state budgets that come our way, and maybe flatten out the impact of some declining enrollment. Another strategy, could some federal money come our way? We already got one round of federal money for $1.3 million. There's talk about more federal money coming our way. It is one-time money, so we have to be very careful, but could federal money coming our way dilute that as well? So we're going to address that with a lot of different strategies that you're going to hear over the next 2 months as part of what's going to be called a budget reconciliation plan. This is only the baseline model. I've said that a few times already, haven't I? Right? Baseline model, right? This is just more specifically the revenue side of the general fund, and you can look at that a little bit more closely. I don't want to say there's nothing of interest on it because it's all interesting to me, right? This is the expenditure side of Fund 10. Special ed, and you will see that transfer in special ed, that $10 million transfer. It does go down a little bit. 10.7 goes down to 10.3. Fund 10 is helped by a smaller transfer because the reimbursable expense went from 28 to 30. I showed you on a previous slide. Special ed. Specifically to the special ed revenue. Specifically the special ed expenditures. Fund 38, that's the debt retirement for non-referendum. Why would we have debt that's not referendum? Well, the board authorized an energy efficiency set of projects in 2015 and 2016. We did borrow money for those energy efficiency projects. This is the debt service on those loans. You'll see if we go current year and going forward, those are all about $2.1 million, 2.1, very stable. It does go down in this year, and when we're talking about financing a potential $148 million bond referendum, we would take that into consideration, and we would wrap new debt around existing debt to try to avoid some of the volatility in levies. Here's the referendum approved debt. That's the history of referendum approved debt. It's probably more interesting to look at this one. Currently, our referendum approved debt service on loans, bonds actually, loans that the community said to take out for improvements, currently amounts to about $14 million. Next year, remember, the assumptions on this model are that no referendum is passed, right? So people think if the referendum fails, we won't have any debt payments. This suggests otherwise. Our normal debt payment next year, if a referendum were to fail, a bond referendum were to fail, would drop down to $555,000. But we'd be foolish not to continue the defeasance strategy that we've been in the midst of for 3 years now, to not call all of our future debt and make that $12.4 million. So it would go down, but it wouldn't go from $14 million to nothing. It would go from $14 million to $12.4 million. It would go down. And then if a series of referendums would fail, it would go down from there to about $800,000 because we would be out of callable debt. We would no longer have an opportunity to prepay debt after next year. Again, the assumption is that no referendum passes. And that's the last of my reports, and I can answer any questions that you might have on any of this or anything else.
All right, thanks, Bob. Any questions for Bob?
I just have one thought. Can you remind me, with the enrollment decline that we saw this year, with the declining enrollment exemption and all of that stuff, what is the earliest the budget sees the impact of that, assuming it stays, as you said, it stays flat?
Just now, I'll probably have a hard time finding it exactly, but if we go to Fund 10 revenue, Fund 10 revenue, you will see that general fund expenditure, general fund revenue is right here. And the numbers are small, but maybe you have it on your screen, you can see it a little bit larger, but you'll still get the point. If we look at these two categories, or we just look at revenue all around, our revenue, total revenue starts to dip, 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 and after 2 years it goes up. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, our assumption was zero per pupil before we go 150, 150. And probably a bigger reason, you start to get out of that rolling 3-year average going down, down, down. So it does take that third year before you can kind of get it off your books, so to speak, that decline in enrollment, because they always talk about the new 3-year average and the old 3-year average, and we're going to be in the middle of that for a while.
So it's really in 2024, assuming everything else stays the same, state aid, declining enrollment exemption. In 2024, we'd see the decrease of whatever the per pupil aid is times the number that dropped. Okay, thank you.
Pupil decline comes in two different versions. We also have the open enrollment out versus in, and if we can recover that money, that comes a little quicker, because every year you actually get charged real dollar amounts for how many students leave versus how many students come in. That is a little bit quicker turnaround on getting students back.
All right, other questions for Bob? Bob and Noel and your team for that information. We're moving to agenda item 7. This is an action item, and this is a recommendation for 2021-2022 capital projects to be presented by Mr. Seiler.
Good evening, and thank you for your time considering this. That's kind of a hard act to follow. I don't have nearly that many graphs and charts to work with. So in your board packet, you'll find some information that probably looks pretty familiar from previous years. The first few pages illustrate just all the projects we've accomplished over the years, and sometimes it's kind of fun to look through that and remind ourselves that we actually have accomplished something. As you get towards the end, the last page, okay. You'll see a 3-year plan, and I believe statutorily, I think I'm murdering that word, we're required to provide 3 years of data. Obviously, the 21-22 year is what we're looking at, and the reason we come to you at this point in the year is obviously the majority of our capital spending happens during the summer, and if we waited for the normal budget process, we would be way behind in that, in our ability to get those bids and contractors lined up. So as you can see for this coming fiscal year, our needs are somewhere in the range of 4.8 million, and through a number of strategies, mostly postponing and relying on a referendum or some other funding source, we prioritize and push those less urgent projects down the road. And the end result is our capital budget remaining consistent with what it's been for the last number of years. And I believe in Bob's budget projections, he actually shows that being flat into the future as well. So in your packet, I believe there is a motion to forward that to the board unless you have some questions for me.
Larry?
Just a comment that, once again, another year of a flat budget, and that's accomplished, as you mentioned, through referendum dollars and energy efficiency dollars, and I just think it's important for the public who's watching to understand that's why Dr. Hiltz has referred to the referendum as continuing to support at the same level that the community is already supporting us, because that's what the referendum does, is it allows us to continue to keep that flat budget. And I think it's worth pointing out every year that that's how we accomplish it. It's with referendum dollars.
Thank you, Lance. Any questions or comments? All right, then I'm seeking a motion to recommend to the full Board of Education the approval of the 2021-2022 capital projects and corresponding budget.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 8. This is a co-op agreement for sports that will be presented by Ms. Jennifer Rauscher. Sorry, Dr. Rauscher.
Hello, everyone. This is another co-op program that I'm asking you to continue. This one is for hockey, and it's a boys hockey co-op. It involves East and Merrill and Newman Catholic.
Are there any questions? Okay, I think it's pretty straightforward. Thank you. I'm to recommend to the full board the approval of the hockey co-op agreement as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, we're moving on to agenda item 9, project relaunch update. Turning it over to Dr. Hiltz for updated information.
Thank you, Dr. President. Sorry. Everybody's a doctor tonight. Dr. Rauscher may want to return to the podium. I'm going to ask her to give the board and the viewers a to-date update on the academic performance of our secondary students. Before she shares it, I just want to remind everybody that the Wausau School District has always been known for excellence. High academic achievement, strong sports and fine arts productions, and really working cooperatively with families to grow, nurture, fine young people. And that's still our goal, right? We want to be an excellent organization. When you do research on what every excellent organization has in common, there are 3 factors. One is a top quality product, which we've always turned out. 2 is engaged employees. And 3 are happy customers, right? And I know people don't always like to talk about schools in terms of customers, but we have a clientele that we serve. So as I was developing this, I had those 3 constructs in mind. You're going to hear tonight that our academic achievement is struggling, is decreased. You're going to hear that our students are struggling. To date, our employees have long tenures here. Employees are very happy in the Wausau School District. You'll hear some of them are struggling a little bit. And you'll hear, we have heard from our parents that they're struggling too. We're in a very difficult time. And so how do we best maintain that level of excellence? That's where my mind went as I was creating this. So with that in mind, I'd invite Dr. Rauscher to give us the most current input or information on our secondary students' first semester achievement.
Thank you, Dr. Hiltz. First, I have to give a huge shout out to our administrative assistants at our secondary schools who have been working very hard to get me accurate data. grades for first semester were actually due at 3 o'clock Friday. So, not much happened with that over the weekend, but this morning they really dove in and they've been feeding me information with support of the principals throughout the day. So please note, they've done an amazing job. If there are any errors here, they are my errors, not theirs. They are fantastic. So first we took a look at how our secondary students did first semester. And so what you'll see is middle school on the left, here, my left, and high school on the right, and comparing in kind of the pink where students were last year at the end of first semester, and then the purple is this year. And this particular slide is looking at, again on the left, the number of middle school students that earned Fs. So not the number of Fs, but the number of students with one or more. And you can see where we had 94 middle school students at this point last year. Now we have 421 this year. At the high school, looking at the same comparison, 4 grades rather than 3 grades, we had 320 students with at least one F at this point last year, and now we have 623 at that point this year. So here's another way to look at this data, and this is the number of Fs at our high schools. So the high schools are combined, and what you'll see in the pink is Q1 of last year compared to the end of first semester last year. So you can see we were at 817 Fs, not students now, but Fs. And that dropped from the end of first quarter to the end of the semester to 734. So that's a decrease of 83, about 10%, roughly. When you look at this year, at the end of first quarter, when all of our students were 100% learning remotely, we had over 2,000 Fs registered at our secondary schools, or excuse me, at our high schools. And that, since then, at the end of this semester, has dropped to just under 2,000. That's a drop of 502, or about 20%. So a few takeaways from this slide. It is good to see that we have fewer Fs at the end than we did at the middle of the grading period. That's positive. And so I say congratulations to our teachers and to our students and our families for doing the work to make that happen. Other things I would point out is when I was here last and spoke to you about achievement, I talked to you about a number of strategies that we were going to implement to try to make things better. And the fact that last year we had a 10% improvement and this year we have a 20%, I think really speaks to the fact that we've made some of those improvements. And one of the strategies that we worked very hard at was encouraging our students who had struggled during first quarter to be more present in our schools during second quarter. Sometimes that was simply students having the choice to come back in person in the hybrid model. But some of our students who remained 100% virtual, we still looked for ways to get them into school, whether it was coming in and using our hubs, whether it was coming in on Fridays. And so I think you can see that the strategies that, and I say we, but this is our teachers and our students working very hard. They're the ones who made this achievement. A piece of data I did not have for you at the end of first quarter was to look at GPA, or grade point average. That's only calculated at the ends of semesters. So on the top graph here, you'll see the middle school GPA comparison. And I didn't necessarily want to compare schools, but I wanted to present the data the best way that I could. So you'll see we have middle school 1 and middle school 2 and then a combined. And the reason I didn't just go to straight combined is because even if you looked at just the schools individually, those are based on averages. So looking at what was the average GPA at the middle school level for our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, taking each of those averages and averaging them. So it gets a little bit watered down the more you move towards that combined. So just please be aware of the numbers there. But in general, the takeaway, if you look, is that our students dropped from roughly a B GPA into the C GPA range at both middle schools, and it's the same when you look overall from last year at this time to this year at this time. Same types of calculations at the high school level, and again, you can see students here, everything stayed within that 2 to 3 range between the C and the B range for GPA. but each of the individual schools and then the overall, the GPA is lower this semester than it was last semester. And then this is a different piece of data. WAVE is one of our charter schools. It is designed to be online. So where our traditional brick and mortar schools have been operating in probably what we could best call remote learning. Last spring it was emergency remote learning. This year it's been a little bit more planned remote learning. WAVE is designed to be an online school all the time. It was online before the pandemic, it'll be online after. So their data is a little bit different in terms of how I presented it, but also I think you'll see the achievement is strikingly different. So what we looked at here, thanks to Jenny Seymour, our WAVE principal, she shared with me course data for our full-time WAVE students. So these are our middle school and high school students who are full-time at WAVE. And if you just simply look at the number of courses that they took and then look at whether they were successful in passing those courses or not, you can see at the middle school level for those 3 grades, we have a 91% success rate or a pass rate, and at the high school level, a 95% success rate or pass rate for this semester. And again, what are the takeaways here? I think the biggest thing I take away from this is that when we have these conversations about what kids need in order to achieve, we're talking about 2 things. We're talking about the structure of their learning, and we're talking about them and their families being able to make choices. So when you think about a WAVE student and a WAVE family, they very intentionally and in a very informed way selected WAVE as being the best fit for their child. And I think when you look at that, a family who is choosing WAVE and understanding what online schooling looks like and making sure that they have the supports they need at home as well as the supports from the school, they can be very, very successful. So I just think nothing we're talking about tonight is saying that online schooling or virtual schooling is a problem. It can be wonderful, as you can see in this data, but it has to be intentional and it has to be chosen. Yes?
But, could you just expound on that just a little more for the public? Because we get a lot of people that write to us and say, oh, you know, let's open schools up, and the people that don't want the families that don't want to send their students back can send them to WAVE. And we're aware that WAVE is very different from the virtual option, but could you just maybe a comment or 2 on that?
Sure, absolutely. First, I would say, yes, you can send your children to WAVE at select times. And one of the things, because of the way WAVE is set up, we do ask families to make a commitment at the beginning of the semester and stick with that commitment at least for the semester. So yes, families can look at WAVE. They could certainly be looking at WAVE now if they're interested for next fall, but we don't move in and out of WAVE during the semester. And part of the reason is that with the online schooling, students and their families, if they're, depending on how the age of the child and where the families want to be involved, they really set their own pacing. The online classes are not, at the secondary level, are not what we would call synchronous or live. Instead, it's all asynchronous or virtual in that a student will get kind of the plan for a semester's worth of learning at the beginning of the semester, and then it's up to that child to say, okay, if I begin with the end in mind, leader and me, I want to be here by May, whatever the date is, then I'm going to have to break this up and do so much each week, each day to make this work. Oh, my family's going to be traveling, maybe not this year, but in previous years. I will work ahead a little bit so that I can enjoy that vacation. Or I'm going to take WAVE with me because it's designed to do that. Or I'm going to make sure I have a little extra time when I return from this trip to get caught up. So students and families have a lot more flexibility. It also comes with a lot more responsibility. And that's part of the conversation. If a family decides or a student decides they're interested in WAVE, we have a lot of information on the WAVE website that kind of talks about what we offer and what the student needs to bring and what the family needs to bring in terms of support. And that's what I mean when I say they can make that informed choice.
Thank you.
Also, just one other note, there's a school we have not talked about, and that's EEA, which is our other 612 charter. And Dr. Young and I, the principal at EEA, were talking a little bit today, And she said, Jennifer, I've really thought about this. I don't know how to give you really amazing data. And I said, Shannon, that's okay. The point of EEA as a charter is to be very individualized. So just to give you a quick touch, students there are working in an online curriculum as well with teacher support. And the expectation is that students achieve an 80% in a learning standard or in a piece of learning before they move forward. So I might get to that 80% really fast. Somebody else might need to take more time, and that's fine. It's the nature of their charter school to be able to adapt and put in the right supports for that to happen. And so when it comes to conversations like the one you guys are thinking about tonight, there's also a governance board at EEA that will have these conversations for that particular school. And their goal, based on what I've heard at their meetings, is to retain that individuality and the ability for the staff at EEA to work directly with students and families to create those personalized paths.
What it comes, is this working? Is for the kids that do WAVE, they have very good executive functioning skills. The kids at EAA, maybe not so much because they need the staff input to help them stay on track. And why so many of our kids are struggling now might have something to do with their executive functioning not being developed enough.
Definitely, and I think in talking with our students, like, it's a really good point, Jane. The grading data only gives you part of the story. It doesn't tell you the social emotional pieces. And so yes, it doesn't give you a sense of which child may have been more equipped to manage a different type of learning than others. It also doesn't reflect the students who are, and thanks to Mr. Bushman, I was able to meet virtually with 4 students like this last week. The students who are very high achievers, and their grades are probably A's and have stayed A's, but they talked about their stress level being very different, the amount of sleep they are getting being a lot less than a typical year. So there are student concerns that are not reflected just in this grading data. So that's another important piece. It's part of your decision making tonight. It's not the only piece you need to pay attention to.
Dr. Ruscher, you and I talked about this a little bit earlier. In our conversations with the secondary principals, we also talked about comparing the performance of students who are in person versus students who are virtual. And it's difficult because of the variability of students who are choosing either or changing. Could you speak to that a little bit, maybe anecdotally? What are we expecting as we continue to analyze grade data? Do we have an expectation as a comparison between those two groups?
We have started just a little bit today to try to look and see what are the differences, or are there differences in the grading data for our students who have remained in remote learning from September all the way until now, compared to the students who came to the hybrid model at the beginning of November. And I don't have amazing information for you. And we've sort of muddied our own waters here, but with the best of intentions, as Dr. Hilt suggested. And as you know, at the secondary level, we've been able to be very flexible with families. A family who's, maybe opted for virtual and then said later, no, I'd really like to be in person. We've said, okay. And a family that maybe tried in person and then said, boy, something has changed, or this isn't working like I thought, we'd like to go back to the remote learning. We've said, okay. Sometimes more than once for the same family. So that, because of that, we don't necessarily have distinct groups as we do at the elementary level. So I can't tell you, this group and follow their grades was 100% remote learning the whole time, and this group was in the hybrid. So it's a little bit muddy there. The other thing we've done, again, with the best of intentions that has made it a little bit more complex is at the end of first quarter, when we saw that students were struggling, we said, hey, would you like to be with us more often? And so some families made the choice right at the beginning there to come to the in-person model. But again, some we've said, well, what if you could be here just once in a while? Would you feel more comfortable coming on a Friday where there are a lot fewer people in the building, but we could get you some connections? Would you like to come in and work in our hub which might not be the same as coming in and attending your classes each day, but create structure. So we took some of our students who were struggling the most and tried to entice them in, and that again has sort of muddied our data a little bit. The little bit that principal, oh, go ahead.
And I'm glad that Dr. Hiltz mentioned that. That was going to be a question of mine, because I think we need more specific information on this. We don't know how many of these students are virtual learners that will stay virtual learners if there is a change made, and if there are board members that rely on this grade information as part of their decision making, but those individuals with the failing grades stay in virtual. Whatever the situation that we're trying to remedy here, we're not going to be making the best decision. We don't have that accurate data in front of us.
I can tell you the little bit what we've seen is that it's a mix. And this is just looking at some GPA data today, trying to compare in-person to virtual, knowing that those groups have flexed. There's some things that seem to reflect that our in-person students are outperforming the virtual. There's some that reflects the opposite. And there's some where it's really, really close. So it's not clear, there's not a clear story yet. But I think what is different between a student who's 100% virtual or remote and a student who's in a hybrid situation right now is the student who is choosing virtual is choosing 100% virtual. The student who is choosing to be in person can only be in person for a set amount of time. Right now we have not yet given them the choice to say, I want to be in person and I want to be in person 4 days a week. At the elementary level, we've done that. We have not done that yet at the secondary level. So I think that's where it comes back to that idea of what's the right structure for a certain child, and their family can help them decide that, and then are we providing those choices for all of our students and families?
Just to be clear, at the elementary level, we do maintain 6 feet of social distancing.
So the unfortunate thing that we'll find out when it's all said and done, how much our upper level students have dropped and how much our other students at other levels have dropped. That's the unfortunate thing about the whole situation, is that you can compare all you want, but our decision right now would be completely virtual where we've been. We know we're failing, just failing rate. We don't know what our upper students who actually have done well, or hopefully have done well, where they're going to be until it's all said and done. And then it's all done. The game's over.
And
that's my concern.
Yeah, and related to that, one of the questions that has come up just as we've been having conversations across the principal group is even the timing of this. If I go through another quarter, and maybe there's a change at fourth quarter, if I'm failing again, do I feel like there's hope and room to turn that around,
right,
or not? And we don't know, as you said, but those are the kinds of questions that come up.
And then we'll find out about the ACTs, the SAT, and where we're at with that. And unfortunately, those students will be moving on, and then they'll be behind when they go to college, 2-year school, because of the fact we've had almost a year now where we've been in these type of modalities, unfortunately.
And I can tell you the small number of students that I was able to talk about or talk with, one of their concerns, and again, these are some of our highest achieving students, is are they going to be ready for the next step? Have they learned enough? They're aware that things are different and that maybe the same amount of content isn't being covered, and certainly our teachers are looking to teach skills that underlie, even more so than content, I think, but those are definitely questions that our students have as well.
Dr. Rauscher, are there plans underway for a more robust summer school program where these Fs can be made up or overridden in some way?
We are approaching that in a number of ways. One of the things that's happening, it's happened in past years, but I think happening more so this year, is looking at issuing incompletes at semester, would basically would give students another window, like 2 more weeks, if they were close to passing and earning a credit, say at the high school level, to another couple weeks to make that up, close that gap. We've also been having conversations about, certainly about summer school, which is a spot where we've done credit recovery before. There's a little bit of concern of, oh, if we have more and more and more students who need to do summer school, can we get them through? Will we have enough staff? Students who might have to make up multiple classes, will that work in a summer school setting? So then we've also had a conversation of, okay, we've got the immediate of the incomplete and we have the future of the summer school. What else can we do right now? Something unique and innovative between now and summer school to maybe hope that the number of students who would need that can be lowered. So we're certainly exploring a lot of those different things at both the middle and the high school level.
So I'm looking at the graphs here with middle school students with Fs and high school students with Fs, and it's comparing semester 1, 2019 to semester 1 of 2020.
Right.
And so we know that this school year is the pandemic year, right? And that school year in 2019 was very different from this year. So to me, when I'm looking at these graphs here, it's not an apples to apples comparison, because 2019 was a regular school year compared to 2020, very different, very different. So I don't see this as an apples to apples, really, because both school years were so different. I mean, you're comparing 2019 to a regular school year to 2020, which is pandemic year. And we had to change the classrooms very significantly because of the pandemic. So I don't see this as an apples to apples. What would be an apples to apples would be interesting to see is the amount of Fs with our school district compared to maybe a neighboring district. I think those would be apples to apples comparison. Because if we see that there are other districts that are in Wisconsin or other districts, that maybe have the same numbers or very close numbers to ours, we can see that we're not the only school district with the same problem. Because that's what I'm kind of, that's the perception that we're putting out there with this graph. And it doesn't give us the full picture, really. It's just comparing a regular school year to a pandemic year. And to me, it's not apples to apples. If we compared it across districts in the pandemic year, I think that would be an apples to apples comparison.
Really matter?
Yeah, it does.
So the point of this whole discussion is the 2 different school years. One was completely in person, one is a split modality. We're comparing the results from completely in person to multiple modalities. In this district, for our students, because that's what matters to our constituents. Why would I care how many F's Stevens Point had? I care about how our students did from last year to this year.
But you can't compare a regular school year to a different school year, which modality was different.
That is a basic scientific experiment. The modality changed from one year to the next. That's what we're looking at.
So, Dr. Hill, you stay in regular conversation with a lot of superintendents. I'm sure this isn't an issue specific to our district.
No, to your point, Ms. Lowe, every district in this region is struggling with higher numbers of students who are failing or underperforming. However, I guess I would, and we could certainly share that data if that's of interest, but I guess I would agree with Mr. McKee. What we're seeing is that this current situation is negatively impacting our students, and we want to make sure the board understands the degree of that and maybe what can we do to mitigate it.
I know that. I'm aware of that. Okay. So let's calm down here. I know that, okay? I know that. What my point is, if we are comparing a regular school year to pandemic year, where students are learning so differently, of course, the outcomes are going to be different because they are learning in different modalities. That is what I'm saying. Because if we can compare district to district, what I am saying is overall, we can see that we are not the only district that is going through this. That is all I'm saying. And I'm not saying you're doing a bad job, Dr. Rauscher. I just think that this is not an apples to apples comparison. So that is what I am saying.
Agreed.
But you didn't just say that it looks like our school district's the only one struggling. You said that the information isn't useful.
No, I never said it wasn't useful.
But it is useful because like you said, the main difference between the 2 years is now our students are learning a different way, different modality. So what we're discussing tonight is what can we do to bring it back to the way it was last year so that they aren't learning in a different way with a different modality so that we can get back to the numbers that we had last year. Like that's where it's relevant. And one of the things I think that is a good point that you bring up is it still wouldn't be the same thing because we still have other outside factors. We can't kid ourselves and think that it's just because of virtual versus in-person. I mean, everything in our lives has changed. So it still wouldn't be the same. But what we can control, we've got to look real hard at how close can we get it to what it was when it was working better. We won't be able to get it the same, but what can we do to get it closer?
Right. Like, I'm not saying that students are getting Fs this year and there's nothing we can do about it. Yes, maybe there's something out there that we can do to mitigate the Fs, I'm not saying that that's not important. I'm just saying that if we're probably never going to have another pandemic year, or depending. So maybe the next school year is another pandemic year, and it would make sense to compare those numbers together. But comparing a regular school year to a pandemic year, I don't see how they are the same.
They aren't the same. That's the point.
They are not. I don't see it that way.
That's the point of the comparison is what can we do to try to make this year more similar to last year? They're not the same. That's the point of it.
I think thinking that way is unrealistic. We're in a pandemic. There isn't any way that we're going to be able to make this school year be the same as last school year.
Right, but that's not what I said. I was very careful with my words and said, what can we do to get it more similar to last year, closer to last year? I even specifically said we can't make it the same as last year. That's not realistic. I agree with you. But what can we do to get it closer? That's the value of the comparison.
I think
So
what we need
could we
to
let
think
Jane's
about.
been patiently waiting to speak, so maybe Jane, and then I think Jeff, Dr. Lee, if after Jane.
I think we're forgetting, or we're not wording it properly maybe, is the reason that our students are learning in a different modality is because we are in a worldwide pandemic. But we need to try and figure out a way to help reduce this number of Fs, and I think part of it is summer school, and I don't believe that having our schools loaded with kids when they can't maintain a 6-foot distance, that is not the answer yet. Because there's more studies coming out. I know we have a study that says 3 feet is good enough, but now there's a new study out from the University of Georgia that says that this virus hides in the brain, just like the chicken pox lives in us. If you have chicken pox, you have that virus and it comes out later when you have shingles. They're finding some evidence that this lives in your brain and can make you more susceptible to diseases like MS and Parkinson's disease. And kids get this disease. They're just asymptomatic, so we don't know when they get them. And having them in school when they can't maintain that distance is going to up the number of kids that get it that we don't know about because we aren't testing them and they don't show symptoms, and leave that future for them where they're more likely to have MS, Parkinson, or one of these other debilitating brain disorders.
Dr. Lee?
It doesn't seem
It's
that
good.
it's...
We can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, regarding the original point of this exchange, do we have any information regarding F rates and modalities chosen by different districts? Does that information exist out there?
I cannot offer you specifics to districts right by us. I can tell you, to your point, Ka, that these questions are being raised, certainly nationally and across our state. Just a quick view of some of the education headlines from last week into this week here in Wisconsin. The Oshkosh School Board, comparable size to us district-wise, they are having this conversation. They're trying to figure out, can we increase the academic achievement and do that safely for kids and students? So they're asking the question of, should their secondary students go back February 8th? Pulaski and Brown County has decided that they will bring their students back February 8th. Ashwaubenon, much smaller than we are, but again, Brown County, so near-ish, nearer than some of the students in the southeastern part of the state that we have data on, are also asking the same question. They actually decided to bring their secondary students back today. So the achievement question is certainly a statewide and a national question, as is the safety piece. And so that's what we're trying to make sense of tonight, I think, is how do we find, to use a leader in me phrase, a win-win approach here? Something that will keep us safe and will be able to boost student opportunity. And that's what we're trying to marry, and I think that's what you'll see in the rest of the presentation, is trying to find out how do we do that well.
Oh, sure, if I may just, there were a lot of comments that were made, and I think there are good points made by board members, throughout this discussion. But I think part of this is just to be clear that we aren't the only district that's facing this. But the other part of that is we're not saying it's okay, and we're evaluating and looking for ways to remedy the decrease in achievement. And can you just remind the board and the public the steps that were taken? Because I wonder if there were other things explored before the suggestion to bring everybody back and reduce the safe social distancing. But I know you mentioned, for instance, the Fridays, but what were some other things that were put in place?
Sure, we've brought students in who've been interested, and we've invited families, and sometimes families have contacted us and said, can my child just be in school? So we've been able to use the hubs that were initially set up for kids who needed internet access. So some students are coming in and they have that structure of being in a school setting, but they may not be traveling to all of their classes if space doesn't allow. There are some students that we've been able to say, sure, come on in. There are some areas where we've been able to invite more students into certain classes or certain content areas because space allows for that. We've certainly looked at using the Fridays, and those are an asynchronous learning day at the secondary level. Many students are taking tests or doing follow-up conversations or just checking in with teachers. We've been more targeted with kids who've struggled and said, not would you like to, but let's connect on Friday, whether that's virtually or in person. Our middle schools are looking at some different, well, actually middle and high schools are looking at some different after-school type programs. For example, at East, there's a block of time at the end of each day where students and teachers can connect, and it can be for enrichment. For example, jazz band is starting, I think, this week during that time, but it can also be for assistance. I mentioned one of the middle schools is doing some study sessions. Some are right after school, some are actually later in the evening, and the evening ones, students can access that virtually. So it does touch the kids who are at home all of the time or don't feel comfortable coming in, and that we have some things that are available in person for students who are doing that. So there's kind of an exploration of just sort of a night school concept at both of the high schools. And again, it's that idea of, okay, if you're not getting enough during the day, or if you're not comfortable being here in the day, but you need some contact to create another possibility. So there's a variety of things that we are trying, and I would say to sum up all of our conversations, it's typically, okay, what can we do? Instead of getting hung up on what we can't do, it's like, what can we do and what can we do now? So this is another one of those questions. Can we do something different with students who would choose it or families who would choose it in terms of the amount of time they spend in school?
Oh, sure.
Your data has been good to let us know that our students are failing at this point like everybody else in the country. It's not just us, but the bottom line is it gives us a level where we need to look at. And now we'll take a look at the interventions that we have to do. I'm glad that you're telling us about some of the interventions that you're going to be doing, because that's probably more important than anything else. We got to have data. And then you got to come to us and let us know what you're doing with interventions, because we need all of our students to be raised up, and only teachers can do that. Otherwise, we'd be in technology all the time, and we know that doesn't work. The teacher is important. And so thank you for letting us know about the interventions that you're putting in. And you're going to have to be thinking outside of the box as well. If it's not the best practices, it's going to be the next best practices that we have to be thinking about. So thank you for telling me about that, and continue to look at new ideas, because the old ideas were for the other way of teaching. This is a new situation.
And just to that, Dr. Rauscher, I
think it's about that we need to be looking towards the future and what we can do to revise this and be leaders. We don't need to be followers and listening to whatever else is going on. But Madam President, I'm very concerned that what's happening is we're falling into a discussion here rather than getting through the presentation. And I would like to see us move forward and get through the presentation and then follow with a discussion.
Well, this presentation contains grade information, and then we get to some other information. So it's really different presentations. I was actually surprised to see grades added in here. So I think we're still talking about the grades, and I think it's appropriate, as long as there are still questions about grades, to continue to ask those until we get to the other data. Dr. Rauscher, I just wanted to comment about the interventions that you listed, because I do think it's important for the public to be aware that there are continued creative interventions that are being developed, and I certainly hope that the teachers are being consulted as part of that, because they're the ones right there on the front lines, and what might be working in somebody's classroom might be really effective in another classroom. So I certainly hope that their voice is a large part of the development.
Yes, and just two quick examples. One would be our principals do an excellent job of working with their department leaders and their team leaders within the buildings, and that's where these ideas come from. So they're certainly not, I can't take credit for these. Mine is to say, well, what can you do? And then they come back and say, well, we had this meeting, we had a conversation, we brought this team together, and here are some things. And then they share those with each other and develop from there. The other place I see it more directly is I've been able to work with Chris Nyman, our coordinator of professional learning, and again with the secondary principals, so that January, during the professional development day that we had, we blocked some time so that teachers had the opportunity to work with their colleagues 612 across the district. Not that we brought everybody 612 together, but I was able to say to the department leaders, hey, this chunk of time is set aside. You won't have other meetings. You won't have other responsibilities right then. Think about how you want to use this. And I certainly gave a couple suggestions, but it was up to that teacher leadership to decide what they need. And one of the pieces of feedback I've heard, because I did say, when you're done, just please tell me how it went and what you might want to do with future days. And so one of the things I've been hearing feedback-wise is we would like to do this again for that exact purpose. They want to be able to share their successes with each other and learn from each other. So that's our next conversation about how do we get them that time, hopefully in February.
Wonderful, thank you.
Clarification, everything that I have read, I'd be curious, Keith, Dr. Lee, whomever, everything that I've read indicates that universities are going to be moving away from ACT scores, SAT scores as acceptance criteria in the coming years. And they're going to be relying more on GPAs to get away from comparing, kids across the board and instead evaluating kids based on how they're comparing to their individual standards. Is that consistent with what you guys have seen or have been told as well?
I have seen a relaxing of ACT. Some of the universities that I've followed are saying, if you have an ACT score, you can share it with us. If not, here are other ways to show us who you are and what you have. I do think ACT is going to continue to be important for scholarships.
Yeah, and I just want to underscore that because it shows the importance. I mean, GPA is always important for those kids who want to pursue that, but I believe, based on what you said, it's even going to become more important in the future, which is why everything we're talking about is so relevant. Thank you.
Did you have anything to add to that, Dr. Lee?
No, I don't have anything specific to add. I'm not part of those conversations at UWSP. But there is a lot wrong with standardized testing, ACTs, SATs, et cetera. They're very problematic. And so I think I think that's the reason that one-time test, and they cannot be culturally neutral. And so the GPA and the particularities of a student's educational environment up to the college level is probably much better reflected in their GPA. So that's much of the reason.
Any other questions?
No, I think we can go to the staff survey.
Thank you, Dr. Rush. All right, excuse me. So we'll continue. Again, just a reminder of the 3 criteria for an excellent organization, right? Superior product, engaged employees, and happy customers. So we did a survey of our secondary certified staff only. You can see the results. 276 staff, an 88% response rate, so a strong response rate. If I summarize this in 3 bullets, it says, yes, having students in school more often will help more students succeed. Second point, I feel very safe now, our staff are telling us, in this current situation. And they would also say, I would not feel as safe if we brought more students in. I'd like to wait until after we've been vaccinated. That's how I summarized the general survey. I'm sorry, Cassie, where are you? Oh yeah, if you go to the next, thank you. So simple Likert scale, we ask, can we help more students succeed? Here's a visual representation of it. Certainly on the left, you can see at the bottom is a strongly agree, on the right is a strongly disagree. Clearly people believe yes, that would help students succeed. To the next slide, we start to say, okay, so what are the risks associated with that? One question that board had asked is, if you bring these students back in, are you able to maintain, first of all, students 6 feet apart? Because that could still be possible. From this pie chart, you can see roughly half say yes, I could maintain 6 feet in some of my classes. About a third say none, and about a fifth say all of my classes. The next would be, if those students are less than 6 feet apart, are you as a teacher able to, or a pupil services person, are you able to maintain 6 feet from the students? And you can see it leans toward no. There's many that say yes. When I asked some clarifying questions of our secondary principals about why that would be, they say, well, it kind of depends on the size of the classroom is a big factor in whether a teacher is able to maintain that 6 feet of distance. Next, I was very happy to see this on slide 10, which is about, I feel relatively safe. There it is. I feel relatively safe in our current learning situation. I was thrilled to see, right, most people strongly agree or agree. Moving on then, okay, so if we bring these students back, will you feel as safe? And I know that's a tough question, right? Probably not. To what degree do they not feel safe? Hard to quantify. But you can see a general tendency toward they would feel less safe. So tried to make that a little more concrete, and I focused it around the vaccination. Would you prefer to wait for the vaccination? You can see a very strongly agree, yes, they would. Let me finish a few more slides, and then we can discuss. I want to make sure people understand, you know, the grades, the academic achievement that we're looking at is not the student's fault, it's not the teacher's fault, it's a structural issue. We've seen that, we've debated about, you know, whether this is the same and not, and certainly this structure does not support academic excellence as we want it to. Going to the next slide, just remind that we do have at least 7 districts that are currently you know, offering all their students every day. And I have to offer an apology to the Mosinee School District. I was in touch with my counterpart in Mosinee today, who asked me to clarify a couple of data points. They are very proud of the fact that they're about 92 to 93% in person. They socially distance to the best extent possible and have very, very low transmission rates. So I wanted to make sure I clarified that. So we've talked about these data. I don't need to revisit them. There was a question about the number of districts. It is a small number, but if they can do it, would we be able to replicate? And I have to remind people, you know, we've been here before. My mind goes right to October when we were virtual. We saw the data. We didn't do an extensive study. We looked at our regional, our neighbors, and we saw they were doing it. It seemed safe, and we went ahead and took the next, what seemed to be the next logical step. I also want to make one comment to our staff who might be watching, or will certainly have a conversation about this. In that the three components of an excellent organization, no one of those is more important than the other. So to have a superior product, to have engaged, happy staff, and to have happy customers, in our case, families and students, all three are equally important. So when I look at the data we just reviewed, we are sincerely reviewing their feedback. We won't agree with everything. And so when I look at this, you know, I weigh all these factors, and that is how I came to this last proposal. Are you on that slide? Thank you, Cassie. So in all of my conversations, everybody agrees that students would be more successful in person. The question really is, when? Some people would say next fall. Most people I talk to are somewhere between February 15th and fourth quarter. I chose March 1 partly in conversation with our secondary principals because we were hoping by that time our staff would have the first course of vaccine. And again, their you know, level of anxiety, you know, their concerns about, you know, self-care as well as the safety of students and families, and some of the things that Jane has mentioned with variants. We were hoping that by that point, you know, we would be in a better place. So you can see my proposal, you know, trying to create something that, you know, is a standard that everybody can support, right? It's not about the board, it's not about me, it's about what is this standard of excellent education, what is this standard of safety that is satisfactory to our staff and to our families. So there's my proposal, and certainly I would welcome any questions.
Question. You chose a certain number of districts. Can you just give us a little more background information on how those districts were chosen and what the process was to get that data? I know you're in communication with superintendents all over the state. Just, I'm not clear why those are the districts we've chosen
Right.
to look at.
So we were first pointed to those schools, based as examples of schools that were, had all their students in person and had low transmission rates. So that it was really just a tip, if you will. So we looked at those schools, and indeed, they did say, yes, we are in person, all of our students. And yes, when we looked at their transmission rates, they were comparable to ours. Then we thought we should probably expand that search, and Ms. Gundram has a nice set of contacts down in that general region, and so we surveyed the 23 that you saw previously, and you saw some of the anecdotal evidence that they shared about quarantines. So that has been the extent of that research. I would say that in this survey to staff, I did ask them, if you have colleagues in these schools or others, reach out to them. Let's get an on-the-ground kind of a version of what's going on. And I will tell you that I read all 150 comments, and they are everywhere. So again, there are some who are saying, I have friends and family in Mosinee or Merrill or Elmbrook, and they love it or they hate it. And so anecdotally, nothing definitive. Clearly, you can see from the data, there were more that were concerned, but nothing definitive.
So besides the difference in social distancing, what things are the same? Like as far as mitigation strategies go, are all the other things exactly the same, or is there some difference on those?
Well, I think everybody's using the typical, right? Everybody has some hand washing protocol. There are some differences in passing times. There's some differences in lunchroom arrangements. But essentially, it's the mask and hand washing. It's really no secret to anybody.
And then I did want to point out that one big difference between this plan and what we were talking about in October is that we were following the guidelines from the Marathon County Health Department, and they signed off on it. So I was just wondering, I haven't heard anything about that here. What was their response to this plan based on your research?
So I don't know if I heard everything, Beth. I will share this and see if I answered your question. Otherwise, please ask it again. We did share the data that I shared with the board and everybody earlier, and we did share that video interview with the Marathon County Health Department. And they've passed it on to DHS to try and get some guidance. That's as far as we've gone down that road.
So we're waiting for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So did I answer your question? I couldn't quite.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we involved them, and it sounds like we did, but we don't have an answer back yet.
Correct.
Okay.
Dr. Hill,
And I had one more thing, I'm sorry. How much, remember when we were talking in October and you said you needed like 2 weeks to put food in place and busing and all that? How much lead time do you need to put this plan in place? Do we know?
I would say that we would just need to make sure that our seating charts are very accurate so that when we do have cases, we can contact trace. And we need to make sure we have enough food on any given day. Bob, I'm guessing a week would probably be okay? Yeah.
So 2 weeks max. I mean, 2 weeks would be plenty
2 weeks
of time.
max. You can see in my proposal that if the board were to take action on February 8th, I was talking about March 1. We had toyed around the earliest being February 15, which would obviously be 1 week after the board gives the okay.
I thought you said March 1st.
I did. The earliest we could from February 8th would be February 15th. Yeah.
So we don't have a date yet.
What about
I mean,
a date?
you said March 1st, but now you're saying February 15th. Is the date concrete yet or not that you're proposing?
I'm proposing March 1.
Okay.
What has the contact tracing shown in terms of the staff infections? Has there been source at the classroom? Or-
Yeah, so both the staff and the student, we do both. Angie Lloyd and her folks do the students, and Tabitha Gundrum and her folks do the staff. And to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe we've had cases transmitted in the schools, or have we now? Am I answering your question first
Yeah,
of all? Okay,
yeah.
all right.
I just want to know, is it a hotbed?
The answer is that we have had some, we have not had significant transfer. And so we do have some cases where staff work in a tighter quarters than the 6 feet of social distancing when they are supporting students, particularly in the special education area, particularly in our coaching areas. So there has been some, but again, considering how many cases we have dealt with, there has been very little of that transmission. We've had a lot of quarantines as a result of exposures, but very few that have actually passed on the virus based on our contact tracing.
Thank you.
So Dr. Hiltz, we actually heard some of that anecdotal evidence that you had urged the teachers to reach out and seek. And one of them did let us know today that they reached out to a friend or colleague in one of those districts who reported that their high school is averaging 18 cases a week. And that was with Cedarburg, so I'm not sure if that was reported to you, but 18 cases with students a week. Since you mentioned you did encourage the teachers, I thought I would share that with you. I do want to point out what I pointed out last week as well, which is that the number of districts here is very small. We have 421 public school districts in the state, and what's listed here is less than 2%. And typically a good reliable sample size is about 10%. The other question, or I should say the question that I have, is in regards to the teacher survey. Was there any indication in that survey that if there were changes, they would start at fourth quarter? Or was there no mention of when a change would happen?
No, no mention.
Okay. Thank you.
Wait a minute. The question that said, I would prefer to wait until after staff are vaccinated before all students attend school 4 days every week, likely in time for fourth quarter.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And my concern is March 1st is you're thinking they'll have their first vaccine by then, but they're not vaccinated then. It doesn't cover them until they get their second vaccine. So we've asked them this question and then we're just going to ignore it.
No, Jane, I'm not ignoring it, and that's why I wanted to make that point earlier. Okay. I take this information completely, coupled with everything else that we know, and I bring the proposal that I think is the standard that this board would support. I value this input. And I'd forgotten I'd made the note about fourth quarter. After the first dose, it's 80% effective is my understanding. It's a lot better than no vaccine. So again, trying to find that standard that people can support.
But with the new virulent ones that are coming, even being fully vaccinated against those stronger viruses that are coming, it's going to be lower than the 95% against the original. So I would like to see that they were fully vaccinated before we return kids.
I have one question. So with your proposal, are parents still able to choose virtual if they wanted to?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good clarification, thank you.
I'm just going to make one comment on this. A vote for this proposal does not mean that someone disregards safety of the staff. Just like a vote no on this proposal doesn't mean that someone does not support the best interest of the children.
Absolutely.
When I look at this, to me, this is, I would prefer personally to see the kids back tomorrow. But when I look at this, this is a well thought out, logical, dare I say compromise? You know, as you said, you know, what you thought, what the board would support. I think this was very well done. I appreciate the information.
Thank you.
I also think it's a reasonable compromise. You know, I've had people contact us saying, do it right away. I've had other people say, wait till next year. I think it's a reasonable compromise. I wonder, let's say the vaccinations get going quickly, like I would hope they would, and come March 1st, we're only a week or two away from our staff all having received their second dose. Would that change your recommendation? Would you at that point think, you know what, since it's only 1 or 2 more weeks, we might as well wait 1 or 2 more weeks? Would your thought process change?
I figured you might ask me that.
Well, I'm a pain like that.
You know, every day since a year ago March, right, with this, there's been, every time new information comes, we have to reassess. So I would have to say yes. I would prefer not to, again, because of the struggles we hear from about our students. But I think we have to take that into consideration.
It's just one of the things going through my mind as well, because if we're, 3 months away from having staff vaccinated, that makes me want to go sooner rather than later, but on the other hand, if we're very close to having staff with both vaccines, and I think it's actually 7 days after the second dose, then it would seem odd to bring the students back if we're only a week away from that.
Correct.
Just a tactical question. Do we know, is the vaccine around here, is it the 1 dose or is it the 2 dose?
2 dose.
2.
That's the one circulating here.
Well, and one of them is a 3-week gap between, and the Pfizer one is a 4-week gap. Do we know which one we're looking at?
Is that
the 4-week?
Sorry, Tabitha's been keeping very close touch with Aspirus, who is our occupational health provider, who's going to do our vaccines, and so she's got the most current knowledge. So that's why I keep looking to her.
Between the dosages, and what's the number for efficacy from the first dose and from the second? And in both cases, is that efficacy after 7 days or is it after 14 days? What are the numbers there?
Would you have that information, Tabitha? I don't know. If people couldn't hear anywhere, we're aware of the 80% after the first, 90+% after the second. We assume there's some lag time between the time the shot is given and the immunity. We don't know if it's a few days. We're not sure of that time frame. Am I accurate? Thank you.
Email from this afternoon. We still don't know when our vaccinations will start.
Correct. We will hopefully hear something from the state on Wednesday, but we don't know if that's an announcement. So we're waiting to see what that information is shared.
The full board will have that information by the time of that board meeting. We'll be better informed, we'll have a better idea, and can address
yes,
that again at that
I would
point.
imagine we may not have exact information by Monday, but I would hope we would by February 8th at the next meeting.
Well, Dr. Hiltz, as was pointed out in the last meeting, reducing the 6 feet of social distancing, that is not what the CDC recommends. It's not what the local county health department recommends. I'm glad to hear that you sought guidance, but it would be helpful to have their guidance, as they are the health experts. And also, Governor Evers issued an order since we had our last meeting, where in the order, safe social distancing is defined as 6 feet.
Yes,
and we would be in defiance of the governor's order. I also have a question about this date being just seemingly arbitrary, because when we switched modality of instruction in the fall, we did that at the quarter. And I'm wondering why we wouldn't wait until the quarter, and ideally at that time our staff have been vaccinated, and it seems like that would make the most sense at that point. So
urgency on my part, really. It's looking at, and not just mine, I'm sorry, you know, everybody's concerned about the grades. And so that's really it. I really want to, you know, support the students as soon, as completely as we can.
Right, and that's why I asked about the intervention methods that were continuing to be developed.
Dr. Rauscher, but is there any curricular difference between going with March 1st or March 22nd, I think is the quarter date?
I would echo what Dr. Hilt said. I think it's just the urgency to bring students back, and as far as why we would do it as soon as we could versus waiting for the quarter, there's that concern that if I, as a student, have already achieved a grade that I'm not happy with at quarter, that sort of cements in my mind that I'm not there. So it can feel like it's harder to recover. You know, if I have a failing grade at quarter, it seems like there's less time to do more work. So part of it is a perception from students versus curriculum work. I do have to say some of the kids, again, that I would hope you would keep in mind are the ones whose grades are okay, but their social emotional piece and approach to learning is not. And for them, those are the kids who are saying, I want to be in school. And there are a number of teachers, not a majority necessarily, but there are a number of teachers in the survey comments too who just say, just please bring kids back. I just need them back with me.
Thank you for that. I can only comment anecdotally, but I can tell you practically speaking, from a mental health perspective, we're seeing more and more and more increase. And every day we go on, I'm very, very concerned with what's happening to the kids that we're seeing. I have 5 therapists that are working with kids, and across the board, they are very, very troubled by what's happening with the psychological, emotional piece. And whether we want to look at health department or CDC, one of the things we're not getting from them is the full ramifications of what's happening from a mental health perspective. So I'm very concerned that the sooner that we can get some of these kids back, the better off, full-time, the better off we're going to be.
We're limiting visitors, so if we brought all kids back, would we be opening that up more so that therapists like Lee and other people have access to students again?
Yeah, Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we began letting therapists come to the schools to meet with students now?
Yeah, and it depends on the agencies. So some of
Okay.
the agencies aren't comfortable sending their therapists into schools, but the ones who are, we're letting them in to see kids. We are also going to start opening it up to social workers and CCS workers from North Central Healthcare. So it's going to be based on student need to begin with, and then we can open it up to visitors and parents as the vaccine rolls out and it gets a little safer within our schools.
So we can do that regardless, and we're starting to do that already.
We have been since November 2nd. There's many struggles. Lee and I are both part of the consortium in town. There's a number of struggles with getting students who are virtual to come to those sessions, so there's some other underlying things. But the kids who are at school are able to see their counselors in person.
And then my other question is, I'm glad that we're going to give parents the choice to remain virtual if they want to, but how are we specifically going to target these kids who are not showing up? Can we require them to come in person, or can they stay virtual and keep not attending? Because if we go all in person and then the troubled students are the ones that decide to stay virtual, we haven't solved that problem.
Right. We've solved some of the problem, but you're right.
Right.
If the students who need to be there aren't, that's an issue. We could tell people they're required to come to school. However, the truancy courts in this region have decided they are not going to enforce truancy laws. So we really have very little to back that up. We have citations Frankly, I think we're getting more traction with the relationships that have been built and the invitation method as opposed to the coercion method.
That's really good to know.
I think that's a good point, Beth, for the students who are failing. And I think those students who are failing, I think it's important that we look at that. But I think we have to look at, you know, the A student who's getting Bs. It's as tragic as the C student who's getting Ds. It's the same thing. So the students that are outright failing, of course, that's an issue, but so are all the students that are struggling. You know, I think we owe as much to the A students as we do to the students who are struggling to pass a class. We just do. We have to push every student to achieve as much as they can. Jeff brought up that we're going to know more information 2 weeks from now at our next meeting. And I think that's important. You know, as of right now, like I said, I agree with Pat. I think this is a reasonable compromise, but I'm thinking that with the understanding that all of our staff who want to be vaccinated will be vaccinated with the first dose, and that there'll be enough time, whether it's 3 days or 7 days or whatever it is, that it's 80% effective by then. And I'm assuming that the second dose isn't just right around the corner, because if one of those two things change, it changes my opinion. If either the staff haven't received the first dose because things don't go as well as we think, or if the staff are very close to getting their second dose because things are going great, it would change when I think the best day would be. And it sounds like it might change what your recommendation would be as well.
The motion to read, if the staff are vaccinated by such a date, we will open.
I think this is a premature discussion because I think we can have this discussion and actually move on it at that meeting then. Because I think we'll have county health department guidance, we'll have information on staff vaccinations, and it's not going to take that long to make a change. I would like to see, we all want to see our students back in the building, but right now I feel uninformed. I need to know more information as it relates to the health department guidance. And if we have that vaccination information, it's going to inform decisions as well. So it doesn't make sense to modify the proposal or to have it be an action item again in 2 weeks. I think that this discussion is just premature and we should take action at that meeting.
Well, we can't, because we can't take final action tonight. So the only thing we can do is say we're going to have this as an action item at the regular board meeting.
Right, which is what we would do, because we're relying on your assumptions, Keith, and the things that you guys put forth here. As we've said since last year, should any of those change over the course of days or weeks, we come back and reevaluate the situation.
Correct.
So passing something tonight, I don't see the harm in that.
That's true. People change their votes from committee meetings.
Mm-hmm.
All we're doing is advancing it to the next meeting. We're not obligating ourselves to vote a certain way in the next meeting.
Yeah,
and
I
again,
guess
we'll know more.
I guess my concern too is just the way that this particular issue has been, and if the message could change, and how that could affect the community. All across the spectrum, families that are concerned about virtual, families that are concerned about getting back in, and it'd be nice to just have a single vote and be done.
Well,
but
I see what you mean, because we know how the board works, but it may be reported as the board decided this, even though it isn't actually what we decide.
At the next board meeting and not take action today. We could take final action at the next board meeting with one vote, correct? We don't have to approve it today for it to move forward.
No, we could simply agree, we could vote to move this to the full board. I mean, that's what it is. That doesn't mean that at the full board meeting it couldn't change. The recommendation may change. That happens all the time. Not usually on a topic that's as interesting as this one is to other people, but things change between the committee meeting and the full board vote often.
I just want to repeat something that Pat said that really resonates with me, and I think I got it right. You said those that vote yes still care about safety. Isn't that what you said? And anybody who votes no to that doesn't mean that they don't care about student achievement. And the problem that I have is that people are making decisions about what board members think is important based on one vote when there's so many factors for us to consider. So I think our community needs to know that we all, every single person on this board, cares about student achievement and cares about student mental health and cares about safety. It's just the way we're balancing those things, and we have to come to a decision of our own where we fall with this specific thing. I wish I could vote not yet, because I'd like to see where the vaccines are. I think we'll know a lot more in a couple of weeks. I'd like to see what DHS says about the 3-foot distancing. And I'd like to know if it's a smart move or not to defy a state mandate that requires 6 feet. So that's where I'm at. I'm not ready.
I'm glad you mentioned the 3-foot distancing because we've had people contact us thinking that we are voting to change from 6 feet to 3 feet, which isn't accurate. We looked into a study and heard from someone who said that 3 feet is safe for students if they're masked. But we are not voting to go from 6 feet to 3 feet. We're still going to be encouraging distancing as much as possible. What we're doing is we're acknowledging that if 60% of our secondary students are in the buildings at the same time, we won't be able to guarantee 6 feet.
Are we guaranteeing 3 though? Are we guaranteeing 3? Or are we guaranteeing nothing?
We haven't measured. As a matter of fact, I did have a request just to say the phrase that would be most workable, if you will, and it would be the greatest extent possible. So if I've got 20 or 25 students, I will spread them out as far as possible.
About what that means. Does that mean we can absolutely do 3? Are we getting anywhere close to 6? And again, 6 isn't an absolute number anyway. We got to be careful with that as well. So, you know, if you can just at the next meeting give us some idea about how far we can think we're going to have the students. Guarantee is perhaps not the right word.
Thank you.
I don't know how we can keep kicking the decision down the road to the next meeting for more information. I think we owe people an option. We owe them some hope, much like they did in the Las Vegas school district, 5th largest in the country. Superintendent said when we started to see the uptick in children taking their lives, we knew it wasn't just COVID numbers we need to look at anymore, said Jesus Yara, the Clark County superintendent.
Can you repeat that first sentence? When we started seeing what?
Pardon me? They started to see an uptick in children's suicides. That's when they came back, and now they're doing everything they can to open the schools as quickly as possible. I don't say that as doom and gloom. We all know that one is way too many. I'm just saying there's different things that are driving decisions. We have a reasonable proposal in front of us. We have data that was provided by administration. You may not think it's enough. You may not think it's the right data, but it's what we have today. And I think we have to give kids and parents and other people hope that, yes, we are thinking about this. We do understand the risk. And Beth, to your point, I agree with you 100%. It's a balance. And I think that everything that has been done to keep people safe has been done. That's going to continue. And this is a very reasonable step forward. If something changes drastically between now and February 8th or whatever the next meeting is, absolutely we can readdress it at that point in time.
I think it would be prudent to modify the motion so that we move it forward and that at the February 8th meeting we reevaluate Project Relaunch with the potential reopening of to all person on March 1st for secondary, but pending additional information, because we'll have the county health department, we'll have information on vaccines. I mean, we can move forward on this motion. That's how I feel more comfortable, because then we have.
If board members are more comfortable with that, the end result is the same, because we don't take final action tonight anyway. So I just think hopefully it'll be reported in the community a little bit more accurately than.
And isn't it true whether we take a vote tonight or don't take a vote tonight? We'll be talking about this at the next meeting anyway.
Right.
I would support that, Tricia.
Okay, because then I feel we can move it forward. Those individuals that are awaiting that information, which sounds like a number of board members, will have that information at that time, or we very likely should.
Hopefully.
And then we can hopefully avoid a risk of misinformation in the community between meetings. Okay.
If we're going to vote on this, I have one statement to make before
Yeah,
we
sure.
actually vote, because I was attacked tonight and I need to answer that. I need to make it clear that my opinion and vote is based on science. My main source is the CDC and Dr. Fauci. To accuse me of voting based on politics is an underhanded attempt to bully me, and to discredit my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Any other comments? I'm just want to make sure I craft this motion appropriately.
Yeah, I just wanted to say too that I just don't feel like we have the information from DHS yet. So I wouldn't be able to vote yes on this tonight.
I think that one of the troubles with that is we may never get information from DHS. DHS may not be willing to say yes or no. They've shown that in the past that is the case, and that may continue. Maybe not, but that may continue. So, I'm looking forward to see what information we have 2 weeks from now, but that might never come.
But when was DHS asked? Can you remind us again?
Last week, I don't remember the exact date.
Last week.
And they haven't indicated anything.
Call the question and then have the motion restated so we know what we're voting on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Jim. So I am seeking a motion to move to the full school board meeting on February 8th to reevaluate Project Relaunch for possible all in-person secondary students, to approve the return for, I need to back up on this motion, for possible approval of return of all in-person secondary students to 4 days of school per week, every week beginning on March 1st.
Second.
Okay, and should we do a roll call vote on this? I believe so.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay, so that passed 8 yes, 1 no. We will reevaluate at the February 8th meeting. It really, as we all have stated, doesn't change the outcome. We would be discussing it and voting a final vote at that meeting anyway, but this way it allows for a little bit additional information. And with that, I am seeking a motion to adjourn.
Wait, before we adjourn, I just wanted to explain why I stopped Mr. Kreischer.
Well,
so
I think at this point we are on agenda item 10. It seemed that if there was something, it would have come up during the discussion of item 9.
Well, will you allow me?
There already was one.
Second it, but what you're supposed to do is after a first and a second, then you discuss the motion. You don't have to go immediately to a vote, and at that point, of course, Todd could certainly say her piece.
And Cal was told she could correct.
I thought it was going to come up naturally as part of the discussion. Okay, do you have a comment, Ka, and then we'll move on to agenda item 10?
So the reason why I interrupted Mr. Kreischer was because if we're giving a candidate time to campaign during public comment, that is unfair to all other candidates. And that was all I wanted to point out, that if he was campaigning, it would be unfair to all other candidates that are running on school board. So that's the only reason why I interrupted him.
But all candidates are allowed to come to public comment and speak for 3 minutes.
Yeah, I don't have I thought it was going to be related to reopening, which is why I said project relaunch, but in any event, it's true. Anybody can go to public comment. We don't even restrict it to Wausau residents, quite frankly. We have a fairly broad public comment that we accept. So at this point, I am seeking a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.